This old guy DIY video has to do with the ongoing saga of the Force by Mercury Marine 1994 40-horse two-stroke engine. So when a friend bought this on the back of an 18-foot pontoon, by some act of God, the thing started in the guy's driveway. When she got it to her house and tried to start it with the muffs on, it would not go. When I took the top off the engine, I found that there was a piece of vinyl tubing running from the fuel pump to the carburetor. It wasn't even a fuel line, and it didn't have any hose clamps or any type of attachment on the end. So in the course of squeezing the bulb, that force had caused the line to fall off into the cowl. So since that adventure, what I found is I replaced the fuel line, I replaced the fuel filter. I found the spark plugs that were in here were L78s when the book calls for an L76. And after replacing from L78 to L76, the vehicle that had previously run only 6 miles per hour on this 18-foot, 1,500-pound pontoon went 12 for about 40 seconds, then it dropped down to 10, then it dropped down to 8. And from the beginning, this thing is smoked like a banshee. So I'm suspecting the fuel pump has either a cracked or ruptured diaphragm. And today, thanks to Amazon, I have a new fuel pump repair kit, and I'm about to put that in. So I gave you the recap. Here we go. We'll put in a new fuel pump repair kit. So removing the fuel pump consists of removing the cowl, which I did. And then there are 4 screws, 1, 2, 3, and 4 that have to be removed. So here in a moment, I'll take off the 2 fuel lines, and this one has the inlet. This is the one that's going back to the carburetor. I'll pull those off, and then I'll remove these 4 screws so I can take the fuel pump away from the engine, and I'll put the engine in a plastic container and work on it. I was expecting a Phillips head or a slotted, but it's a hex head, so I have to go grab a different wrench. So this thing requires a 4mm hex head to pull them off. And this thing looks like it's never been removed. Because there was paint in here, I took a little tiny Allen wrench and scraped the paint out first so I could get good purchase on that head. The last thing I wanted to do is strip this out down by the water. It's not easy for me to get down here with electricity for a Dremel tool to make that accept a slotted screwdriver. So now all 4 are broken loose, and I'm going to pull the pump off of the motor. When I removed the pump, I found there's one piece of cracked lying down here, so I'll replace that thing when I put the pump back on. And when I'm doing jobs on these little things I've never worked on before, I like to use these little plastic containers, so if something falls out, I'll be sure to catch it. So the first step is to remove this nut and take out the sediment filter. So I pulled that out. It was actually a bolt, not a nut. I loosened that up. There's nothing obviously wrong here. So the next step is to take out these 2 little bolts, so then I can separate the pump and get to the diaphragm. These little guys have captured nuts on the back, so I did not want to try to remove that while the motor was still on the boat over the water in case I dropped those little nuts. When I pulled the bolts out, those nuts fell off the back as I anticipated, but the best part is the housing separated, and you look right here, the diaphragm is torn, which is what I was hoping for. So perhaps that $18 kit from Amazon is going to fix this motor. We'll know here shortly. And here's a good look at that torn diaphragm. So there was absolutely no regulation. That should contribute to the high fuel usage and also the smoking. There was fuel pumping in on top of those cylinders at all times. And the part number that I purchased for this is 187806-1. Here's what the kit looks like. I ordered that from Amazon 2 days ago, 18 bucks, and here we are. And when I touched it, the size of the tear actually revealed itself. When reassembling this, the membrane goes on first, and then the gasket on top of it. And then here's the spacer, and the spacer will go on next. Now, as an assembly aid, when putting this sandwich back together, the unit was flipped over this way, and I just put these 2 big mounting screws in the end. They actually screw through the gasket, so that held that together. And then I fed one of these end bolts in. So you can see now all the holes are lined up, and it's just a matter of tightening these end bolts first and then I can put this unit back on the motor. When reassembling this thing, I didn't use the other pieces in the kit. The gasket on this part looked fine, so to reassemble it, I put this back on. There's a little locating notch. I angled this port down the same way it had been, so it's parallel to this one. I tightened this up, and these two are snug but not cranked down, because when I tighten it to the engine, I plan to go in a diagonal pattern, kind of like putting lug nuts back on a vehicle, so I get an even squeeze on that gasket. I got a little bit ahead of myself with the reassembly. This mounting bolt will not go on with this piece mounted in place, so I have to remove this again, put this mounting bolt down so it falls through. There just isn't quite enough clearance for it, but once I do that, then the bolts will all be in place. Now all 4 bolts are in place, so I can put the cover back on and put this back on the motor. And one nice thing is, when you're putting those bolts in, don't force them, actually thread them in, because the gasket is a little bit undersized, so that way they have engagement. And when you're handling the unit, it will stay the way it is, so you don't lose any of these bolts in or over the water. Now I cut a new piece of fuel line to replace this cracked one, and this goes on that port right there. When reassembling this, I found it's much easier to get to these 4 bolts, particularly this bottom one, if you have this filter housing removed. So I pulled it off, I tightened up all 6 of these. Now we'll put the housing back on, put the lines back on, and see if it goes. Well, here's the start after the fuel pump rebuild. It starts and idles, and it's not pumping like it was before, so I'm encouraged. After repairing the fuel pump with that kit from Amazon, we took it back out on the water, and the thing did 15 miles an hour in a heavy wind. Sounds great, runs great, doesn't shake, doesn't smoke. So we're calling this one mission accomplished. Thank you for watching.